Hi, everybody. A very warm welcome to this discussion that we're going to be having here with two very clever gentlemen from TripStack. That's Gabor Tor, he's the CEO at TripStack, and joining him is John Boguslavsky. He's the business development executive and the co-founder of TripStack. And John and I have spoken a couple of times before at PhocusWire conferences, so it's good to have you both here. I think what we wanted to do was really get our kind of heads around some of both the basics of virtual interlining and kind of where the market is now and some of the kind of technical considerations, and kind of finish off with where things are going, because I think it'd be safe and fair to say that virtual interlining is not a brand new concept. It's been around for quite some time. It is the natural, I guess, digital progression of the old school interlining, which has been around for a very long time, probably before the three of us reached this earth. So, I mean, as an aviation sector, this is not new, but it's a modern phenomenon. And that's kind of what we would like to get into today. So, first of all, I think, John, Gabor, sorry, if you can kind of kick things off for us, I think it'd be useful for people to kind of understand about the background to virtual interlining. I imagine we're going to call it VI from here onwards.
Yeah,
But, when and where has interlining kind of come from, and how did that evolve into virtual interlining, and kind of where we are now, almost like what's the current state of the nation when we look at VI?
perfect. Well, first of all, thanks, Kevin, for the intro. We're very excited to be here, and yeah, it's about discussion of VI. So as you rightly said, VI has been around for actually quite a long time, and very good travel agents were able to go into the GDS and put together combinations, but they really needed to know all the content in the flights. But ultimately, it was around the travel agent getting the customer from point A to point B. And it was always there. But as the world evolved, as low-cost carriers started to evolve, as there was a divergence of where the content became, that manual version of virtual interlining became very, very difficult. And as the permutations and the number of flights and options started to grow, it wasn't really possible for any human to do it. So hence, companies like TripStack and others started to put together these combinations. And really it started with the OTA, because they were the ones that had all the content and had the ability to put these combinations together, but it was beyond their technical capabilities. So it really started to evolve, but there are still some challenges to that for traditional OTAs.
And in this kind of state of the nation question, just as a kind of a follow-up, if we can, Gabor, I mean, how many carriers are currently involved in some form of virtual interlining at the moment, if you know that kind of question?
Well, in theory, all of them. they're all
right.
they're all involved in virtual interlining, right? It's whether there's formal or informal consent from these airlines in terms of combinations.
Okay, and well, I know we're going to get into the kind of the formal and the informality of it a little bit later on in our chat. But so tell us then, who wants to do it? You referenced OTAs at the beginning there, but and we'll come to the consumer part of this in a moment. But who has actually kind of driven this desire for virtual interlining?
Well, as I mentioned, it started with the OTAs. So the OTAs, from a differentiator perspective, as it relates to content, there was content from the GDS, and then there are some other low-cost carrier combinations, but it's the OTAs and then their distribution on metas that has really driven the growth of virtual interlining. And I would even differentiate it even more so pre and post COVID. Pre-COVID, it was less of a phenomenon. It was still there, but it wasn't talked about to the extent that it is today. And the way, our internal markers are, pre-COVID, we were doing a lot of the chasing in terms of talking to OTAs and airlines. And now we're the ones getting the phone calls, and we're the ones being asked the questions around what can you do and how can you help us distribute. So it started with the OTAs, but now it's evolving to the airlines. And that's the exciting part to us, because we're having dialogues with the airlines around how do we help them, monetize traffic on their own website, where if a customer was to come to an airline website and they're trying to get from point A to point B, they don't fly there, they would like our help to put virtual interlining content together with at least one leg of that journey being that, we'll call it originating carrier. And so that's where it's now evolving to. So it is the OTAs and other travel retailers, and now also the airlines.
I mean, just as a kind of a supplementary question to that, I mean, that must make, maybe I'm using the wrong word, but does that kind of legitimize it a little bit, the fact that it's carriers themselves that are looking at it rather than it just being the resellers such as OTAs?
In our perspective, it's getting there. Absolutely. It's becoming, as the industry is coming out of this pandemic, it's around what options, what new things can we look at to help us with distribution and monetization of traffic. And so it's definitely evolving.
Okay. Let's kind of think about how difficult or not this is to do. It sounds, you're just connecting a couple of airlines together and it's fine. We do all the heavy lifting, but the heavy lifting is sometimes quite difficult to do. So as a company that does all this kind of stuff behind the scenes, is it difficult to do?
I'll take this one. Yes, overall it's very difficult, and many have tried and many have failed. Including us, we've had many versions of it. We underestimated the complexity of it at the beginning. Like, how hard could it be? You put some prices together and voila. But it's not so simple. The challenge is it's in the sheer number of combinations. So, if you're flying from New York to Paris, there are literally hundreds of thousands of ways to get there. So just a real big computational challenge. You also cannot do VI if you don't have all the right prices. So you need access to the GDS pricing. You need access to all the LCC and NDC pricing out there. You need to make investments in technology and infrastructure to be able to handle the scale of this. So to support global OTAs and their search traffic, you need to be able to handle that scale. So it is not something that could be done simply by a small team. It requires great investment. And then on top of that, once you actually build VI fares, now you need to be able to actually book them. So, just a standard VI fare might have 2, 3, 4 carriers involved. So in order to build a single fare, you need to be able to book 3 carriers. So you need high bookability to fulfill this. So overall, the complexity is quite high.
I would add, just to add also, John, is that once it's also booked, now you need to service the customer. So, you get anything around post-booking, change, cancel, schedule change, and now coordinating across those carriers is another complexity. And so you really need resources and capabilities to be able to do that. In addition to, if you miss a flight, then how do you service the customer to make sure that they continue on their journey?
And we've written what feels like forever about NDC, New Distribution Capability, which is the airline distribution standard introduced by IATA about 9 or 10 years ago. And back to you, John, if we could. I mean, you talked about it's also about the loading of the fares and being aware of all the fares, which does, as you said, makes it incredibly complex. One of the core tenets of NDC was around dynamic pricing. So instead of having one or maybe between 1 and 5 fare classes per flight, you could actually have 500 because it would be done on the kind of the needs and the personalization of the customer. How does that factor into all this?
It certainly does. So we, as part of our VI building, we use LCC prices, as you mentioned. We use GDS pricing, but we've started using NDC pricing. Again, it comes down to you cannot build all the great VI fares without having all the prices, the lowest prices and the prices that include baggage and seats, because that becomes important when you put together itineraries. So NDC is the latest addition to our VI building process, but it's becoming more and more important as more carriers release NDC connections. And TripStack is NDC certified as well. So, and we use this as part of our VI building process.
Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is where you've kind of come from on all this, but there is a classic kind of mantra within the industry is that people have created something that wasn't actually a problem that needed solving. And the reason why I frame it that way is that I'm curious as to where the consumer demand has come for this, because I do wonder sometimes whether they would even realize that there's a virtual interlining that a virtual interline has taken place because they've booked it on an OTA, and the OTA via you guys has done all the heavy lifting. So is it something that they've asked for, or is it something that they don't even realize that they're using sometimes?
I think it's a combination of the two, but a little bit more on the history of this is pre-pandemic, VI was growing. It was growing because more meta sites embraced it. You know, just from a scale point of view, above 40% of all global routes have viable VI on them. So this is not a niche product. It's a product that can produce either the best or cheapest fare on roughly 40% of global routes. So it's a huge amount of fares that are in play here. During the pandemic, it grew drastically because schedules were cut. So anyone who was traveling and needed to get to somewhere where they would have been able to find a direct flight in the past, all of a sudden had to take a one-stop or a two-stop connection, and VI played a bigger part of that. You know, currently, VI represents about 3 to 5% of bookings for savvy retailers. So somebody who's been doing VI for a while, 3 to 5% of their bookings are VI. We see it growing to much higher than that, with 10 to 15% in the future will be VI. And that's, you know, if all the hurdles are overcome. In order to really do this well, you know, you got to make sure you cover all the terms and conditions, that customers understand what they're buying. They understand that they got to transfer baggage from one aircraft to another. They might have to clear security. So there's a lot of things that actually will do it. And as airports get into the mix here, as airports make it simpler to transfer baggage from one carrier to another, more consumers will choose VI in the future. So we just see pure growth here, but the pandemic certainly facilitated the growth of VI.
Can I ask you, just for those that are watching that may not understand, you used a phrase, there are certain routes or connections that have viable VI. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I would say is if there is already a direct flight that's a low-cost carrier is flying on, for example, and somebody can choose a direct flight, they're unlikely to choose a VI flight on that route, because it's already cheaper and faster to go. But a route that has no direct connect, VI is for sure viable in places where, traditionally long-haul routes, so transatlantic, trans-Pacific routes were very, very VI friendly because the combinations are big. But during the pandemic, even shorter routes became viable VI routes in Europe and North America.
Okay, we're going to go back to one of the things that you said at the beginning, Gabor, or that we started discussing, and I promised we would come back to it. And it's this idea of formal and informal relationships. And I wonder if you can talk us through how does cooperation and collaboration work in this kind of sector, with particular reference to when things are done officially and when things are done unofficially, if that's the right terminology for me to be allowed to use.
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer it in two parts. Really, when we talk about cooperation and partnership, I first think about the ecosystem that we work in. And so that's not just, our customers, but all the vendors and partners we work with to gather and acquire content. So whether it's directly with an airline through an NDC or an API agreement, or through other consolidators or through a GDS to acquire and gather content. Of course, we need participation on that perspective. But also as it relates to working with airlines, especially when we're looking at our Self-Connect for Airlines product, and in terms of putting VI together for the airline. And in that case, it depends on the airline specifically and what their priorities are. In some cases, in our discussions with the airline, they very much foster and ask us for distribution capabilities. So connect us with other airlines. We don't really We're not too fussed in who it is, as long as you can help us sell more tickets. And then, also help us distribute it on other channels, whether it's through our other OTA customers or ultimately through a meta channel. They foster that. In some cases, some airlines already have an agreement with an alliance. And in that cases, the dialogues and discussions we have are, well, look, we're going to need to limit this because we already have agreements. So we need to make this a little bit more formal around who and what airlines we would partner with in terms of VI. So it's evolved in dialogues, but it depends on the airline priorities.
The Smith family is planning a trip from New York to Barcelona. Traditionally, a trip with a single connection would cost over $1,000 per person. But the Smith family is booking with a travel agency that uses TripStack technology. The Smith family finds a single connection ticket for just $600 per person. It's a combination of a scheduled flight and a low-cost carrier. Since these flights aren't typically combined together and have no contractual agreements, this is known as virtual interlining. The Smiths happily self-transfer their baggage during transit and save a lot of money. A guarantee protects them in case they miss their connection. The Smiths travel agency provides unique fares that can't be found anywhere else, allowing them to earn a much higher profit on flight bookings while also saving their customers money. Sourcing flights and creating meaningful itineraries with scheduled airlines and low-cost carriers is a difficult process. TripStack solves this complexity to provide our partners with unique content at the lowest prices. Duration, connection time, departure, arrival airports, and baggage restrictions are taken into account when TripStack builds itineraries. Our algorithms analyze billions of route combinations and price points and deliver the best results through a single API. Results are returned in less than a second with over a 95% bookability rate. Double or even triple your typical profit margins while providing the lowest prices out there to your customers. Challenge the status quo. Change the way millions of people travel. TripStack.
Okay, so let's move on to another thing that we've talked endlessly about here on PhocusWire is travel retailing specifically, but as it relates to aviation and what airlines want to do to be able to sell more things and have more partnerships and various things. How does the retail world kind of fit into this?
Well, so the model is there, right? And so, and when I say the model is there, is that with travel retailers, tech companies, airlines, OTAs, they're all there to, they can benefit from this. But ultimately, it's the consumer. And the consumer is by far the biggest winner of this because it is cheaper and in many cases better itineraries because it's cheaper and faster. But there are some hurdles we need to overcome. So the model is there. I think we need to do, as an industry, a better job of marketing virtual interlining to the customer, making it more explicit. As John rightfully said, all the terms and conditions are there on each itinerary when they go to buy it, but there isn't a general marketing of virtual interlining as a product. So there could be more of that, but I think there's some hurdles we need to overcome as well to make sure that because the retailing evolution of this is going to come from the demand of the customer.
Yeah, and we'll come back to some of those hurdles, that hurdle reference in a moment. Just quickly, I mean, new distribution capability is an airline standard. We've had different standards brought about by IATA and various bodies around the industry for decades and decades. Should there be some kind of standards put in place around VI now, do you think?
I definitely, it's still an early evolution of it because there are the various players in the market that can put forward VI. I think the economic models are very different depending on the player. For TripStack, for example, we don't, our costs are very transparent to our customers, but different players in the market do it a little differently. But ultimately, I think the standards there are going to be around the terms and conditions and how the customer is going to be serviced. That's ultimately, the customer wins all the time. And they're the ones, if we don't do a good job of servicing the customer and making sure their journey is as frictionless as possible, it's not really going to get off the ground.
Right, good. Okay, so those hurdles that we mentioned just a moment ago, you know, you referenced the single-digit percentage of tickets that are sold with VI at the moment. I mean, if there weren't hurdles still to overcome, that figure would be much higher and would get to a much higher figure quicker. So talk us through what are the challenges, the hurdles that kind of remain as it is at the moment for this kind of to grow exponentially?
Yeah, we see three main ones. So first one is baggage. So baggage is one of the biggest challenges for the consumer. So the consumer has to transfer baggage from carrier one to carrier two. Airports are getting in the mix here. So we've seen things like Gatwick Connects, where baggage is transferred for the passenger, effectively making it like any traditional stopover flight. Baggage handling companies are also getting in the mix. So they, baggage handling machines do not care where the baggage is going, as long as it's told to go from point A to point B within the airport. So they're getting in the mix, and they're going to be offering this as a service to OTAs and consumers. So we see that as the first step. Security is another one. In some cases, it's rare, but you might actually have to clear security as part of your transfer. So at the airport. So again, people are, certain airports like Gatwick are making this easier as well. And the last one, which is the one that really affects the consumer, is if you miss a connection. So without a guarantee, consumer would be stuck, meaning if they missed a connection. But this is where TripStack steps in, and we have a VI guarantee product that ensures that the connection will be rebooked by us if you miss it. So if there is a missed connection due to a schedule change, a delay, anything that could actually halt the passenger, TripStack will rebook the passenger on the next flight. We also have provisions for lodging and food money as well for any passenger that might have to spend the night. So those are the three main ones, but it's the TripStack guarantee that really protects the consumer.
It would be fair to say that they are fairly sizable challenges though, right? So how confident are you that either you will inspire those partners to kind of come along, or does it need a kind of a collective movement from the industry, the aviation industry that is, to just really kind of say, okay, well, this is actually a good thing. So let's kind of redouble our efforts to try and push this forward.
I do think there are sizable challenges, but there is, as Gabor mentioned, there are actually revenue implications for both OTAs and airlines here. So you can, this will be solved. The transferring baggage will be a service that the consumer pays for. It still will be cheaper to do this type of flight versus a traditional flight. So the consumer will say, I will pay, a fee to transfer baggage or clear security faster. So we see it done that way.
I'm very confident where there's a challenge lies an opportunity. And I think there are many already, contemplating this challenge in the VI space. And I think there's going to be some solutions that'll be coming up in the near future.
One challenge that maybe it's just in my head and it's not one on your list, I think, is around the technology itself. Now, we know, companies like TripStack, that their whole ethos and their ecosystem is based around the technology that supports this. But, I'm sure some of my contacts in the aviation industry wouldn't forgive me for saying, but I think it would be fairly accurate to say that perhaps some airline IT systems aren't perhaps geared up for this. So those airlines that you do have an official relationship with, is that a challenge in kind of getting them on board from a technical perspective?
Yeah, and those are the dialogues that we're having. So even when we get to when we're comparing direct connects, let's just say direct connects to GDS and just searching in those for content in the direct connections for the GDS. So GDS has had decades of experience in how to capture that content and present it. I think some airlines do it better than others, and some airlines have NDC connections that are evolved. some are non-NDC, there are APIs that have certain limitations. They're evolving. I can see that they're trying to do that. But also, they may not have the ability to manage all of the technology required, not just for VI, but presenting it on the website. And so there are players in the market that do pieces of that. And so we're trying to pull it all together and to be a one-stop shop. So we'll do for the airline, we can do the website, and we can do the VI, we can do the servicing, we can do payments. There's a lot of elements that underpin putting a good VI product along with the guarantee to the customer.
Yeah, and we specifically made the platform to be as simple to integrate for the airline as possible. It's literally redirect, from the airline website to our, branded white label, and we take care of the rest.
Okay, so we're kind of into our last 5 or 6 minutes here. I kind of wanted us to look forward a little bit, but first of all, if virtual interlining is about making connections that don't exist officially, one obvious iteration for virtual interlining is to take it into a truly kind of multi-modal world. So it's not only connecting airline routes that aren't traditionally or officially connected, but it's the bus at the other end, or it's the train ticket and stuff. I mean, this is almost like the utopian kind of next step for this. Would you agree?
Yeah, we see it as just a natural extension. So it's rail, bus, and ferries, providing better connections. A number of things have to happen here. Meta sites are not all of them display these sort of connections, so they don't display flight, rail, flight, bus. It's you're on the flights tab, so it's flight only VI that's displayed. But that's changing. Certain parts of the world, rail dominates and bus dominates, so it makes it's a natural extension of that. This will go this way. We also see that it might become actually what you need to do to sell in certain markets. We've seen a number of countries say, look, these are not going to be flight routes in the future. So France, for example, has said Air France will not be competing on price with the French rail system on specific routes. So in order to get to a secondary or tertiary city in France, you might have to take a flight plus rail. So we just see it as natural extension.
Okay, and then last of all, then, I mean, where does this all shake out? We've talked about the multimodal part of it, but what's kind of, if we can dare to call it beyond VI, if that's something that you're already kind of thinking about when people say to you, okay, so what's going to happen in 5 years, fellas?
Yeah, and so multimodal, I think, is a natural extension. It's already happening. I think there's some airlines recently made an announcement that they're doing that. So my kind of bold prediction here is that there'll be the emergence of an actual virtual alliance. So there's, the likes of, there's Star Alliance and One World. What's preventing from a virtual alliance being created? So I think this is, I think we'll get there. I think once a couple of airlines take the step and the leap into virtual interlining, I don't see why a virtual alliance couldn't be created.
And that gets quite exciting because one of the benefits of alliances is not only do they share routes and things, but you use each other's lounges, and there's that kind of the loyalty aspect of an alliance. So Absolutely. A loyalty virtual alliance almost has no boundaries, potentially.
And that's what excites me. And I know we've had discussions internally, but what's preventing it from as many airlines as possible being part of that ecosystem?
Yeah, and if it's ultimately the end passenger or traveler that benefits, then that's the best thing, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, right. Gabor and John Boguslavsky from TripStack, thank you so much for joining us on PhocusWire and sharing your perspective on virtual interlining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye-bye.